and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Arabiya English. I'm Burges Watson, and today we're going to be turning our attentions to Washington because Syria's President Ahmed al Sharaa is meeting President Donald Trump at the White House. It's a historic meeting. We'll be getting the latest on that. Plus, we'll have all the latest on Gaza and the peace plan. We'll be hearing from a leading member of Fatah. Hello and welcome to the programme. Now, today we're turning our attention to Washington for the historic meeting between Syria's President Ahmed al Sharaa and the US President Donald Trump. Well, their meeting comes just days after the US removed al Sharaa from its sanctions list. Well, Sharaa's forces ousted Syria's longtime ruler Bashar al-Assad in December last year. Well, he becomes the first Syrian leader to visit the White House since the country's independence from France in 1946. Well, in a sign of strengthening ties between the new leadership in Damascus and Washington, the Syrian president was filmed playing a game of basketball with top US military commanders, as you can see there. Well, we're joined now by Robert Ford, who was the US ambassador to Syria during the years 2011 to 2014. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. You were, of course, ambassador to Syria at a time when President Bashar al-Assad, as he was then, looked like he wasn't going anywhere. And then today, we've seen pictures of the new leader, Ahmed al Sharaa, playing basketball in Washington, D.C. with US officials. What went through your mind when you saw those pictures of the new president in Washington playing basketball?
Well, it's amazing that Ahmed Sharaa is visiting Washington since he was on the American terrorism list for more than 10 years. The pictures of him playing basketball, I think, are a great public relations effort. I give him credit for knowing how to appeal to Americans.
So he's in Washington holding these talks with President Trump. It's understood that the two men get along well. How can the United States best help Syria, do you think?
I think there are two things the Americans can do. First and foremost, Syria's economy has been devastated by the civil war, and the American cancellation of sanctions that Washington imposed over the years on Syria would help encourage investment, which Syria desperately needs. Its infrastructure is heavily damaged, and private investment in that infrastructure is vital, both for job creation and for rebuilding the economy more broadly. The second thing that the United States could do is to reduce tensions between the Israeli government in Jerusalem and Damascus and find a way to achieve a sort of ceasefire between Israeli forces in Syria. It's not that the Syrians are attacking the Israelis, they are not, but the Israelis regularly attack Syria.
I'm very interested in the relationship between President Trump and President al Sharaa because they got off to a very good start when they met in May in Saudi Arabia. And President Trump described President al Sharaa as young, attractive and tough, amongst other things. Lots of very glowing labels he attached to him. Now, you've met President al Sharaa and you've known him since before he became president of Syria. I'd like to ask you, what sort of a person is he? What struck you most about him when you've engaged in discussions with him?
So I've met him 3 different times between 2023 and 2025. Sharaa speaks very softly. You almost have to lean forward to hear him. He's a thinker. He likes to engage on ideas. He is, I think, pragmatic in the sense that he is not bound to any kind of hard line or very specific ideological agenda. I think he's very much a politician, but at the same time, I don't think he's a Democrat. He does not, for example, welcome the establishment of a viable political opposition at this time in Syria, at least.
Wouldn't that be a little premature? And don't you think perhaps he and his administration, with the help of international partners, need to fix some of the damage that's been done by 14 years of warfare before the idea of elections can be entertained?
Well, two things. Number one, absolutely reestablishing security, number one. And number two, getting a process started to rebuild the economy. Those are absolute priorities. You are totally right. However, at the same time, you can begin to lay a groundwork for eventual political evolution. For example, the country just held a sort of indirect election for a temporary parliament, but there was no political party law. And Syrians, I think, in order to evolve into a more stable political entity, are going to need, for example, political parties and political associations. And those the government is not looking with favor towards.
Okay, so we've talked a bit earlier in the conversation about what Syria wants from the United States. What do you think President Trump wants to achieve and gain from this relationship with Syria's new leader?
I think the Trump administration, like its predecessors in the White House, views the number one priority in Syria as counterterrorism and ensuring that the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria doesn't regain a strong foothold from which it could threaten the United States or other allies, for example, in Europe, Middle East. That is the number one priority. And to the extent that Ahmed Sharaa can cooperate and help on that, he will gain favor in Donald Trump's eyes. The second thing, which I think Donald Trump really would like to see, is an expansion of the Abraham Accords to include Syria. That means a normalization of relations between Damascus and Jerusalem. I think that is still some distance away.
Why is Syria so important? Why do you think it's been taken so seriously as a dossier by the Trump administration?
I think the Trump administration in the Middle East is still very concerned with the counterterrorism dossier. And so Syria plays a big role in that. I should include there Hezbollah and Iranian influence. The Trump administration takes a tough line on Iranian influence in the Middle East, as did the Biden administration and the first Trump administration before this Trump administration. Sharaa is vehemently against Hezbollah influence in Syria. That's another area where the United States and Syria can cooperate. And because Sharaa is against Iranian influence and Hezbollah influence in Syria, that is a plus for Israeli national security interests.
Iran was, of course, close to the leadership and the regime of Bashar al-Assad, as was Russia. Have those two relationships, Russia and Iran, now been entirely eclipsed, would you say, by this new fledgling but thriving relationship between Washington and Damascus?
Well, I think it is a fledgling relationship. I like that characterization. Sharaa was just in Moscow recently and talked about, for example, security arrangements, military equipment, and such things, and also the possibility of Russian involvement in the reconstruction of Syria's oil and power sectors. So it's not right to say that the relationship between Syria and Russia is entirely cast aside or marginalized, but I think Sharaa understands that American and Western capabilities to help Syria, A, get past sanctions, and B, bring in private investment working with Gulf states is far greater than anything Russia can do for Syria economically.
Right, and knowing Syria as you do, and knowing the Syrian people, and having been there recently, you've been there this year already and seen the new leadership in place. I mean, what would be the public reaction to any sort of engagement between Damascus and Moscow, knowing that Russia propped up Bashar al-Assad, Russian warplanes obliterated towns and ensured that period of violence was as long as it was. I mean, do you really think the Syrian people would accept having some sort of relationship with Russia moving forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I was there in January, about 10 months ago, I met a number of fighters from Ahmed Sharaa's HTS militia group, and they were, how would I say it, very angry with Russia. And I met some people whose homes had actually been bombed by Russian aircraft. So I don't think there's any love lost between the Syrian public writ large and the Russian government. But I also have to say, I think the Syrians now want peace. They want good relations with as many states as they can, perhaps with the exception of Iran. And they would accept help rebuilding from just about any quarter, whether it's Western interest, Gulf interest, China, even Russia. The priority, I think, for the population is reestablishing some degree of economic stability and eventually prosperity.
Russia is, of course, where Bashar al-Assad is understood to be residing these days. He fled there on the 8th of December, so almost exactly 11 months ago. Was that a day you ever predicted? And what do you think is going to happen to him?
No, I have to say I was shocked at the speed with which the Assad government collapsed 11 months ago. I think many observers were, but I certainly was. And I think many Syrians were surprised as well. I think perhaps even Ahmed Sharaa was a little surprised at how quickly the regime fell.
Okay, and of course, uniting Syria is an enormous task. It's extremely complicated, and you know better than anyone the fabric of Syrian society and the complexities of it. How would you assess the progress and the achievements of President al Sharaa in bringing about the unification of this country?
The good news is that Syria has not become another Libya in the wake of the Assad government's collapse. That's good news. It's not another Libya, but there is an enormous distance to go in terms of helping the country reintegrate different communities into a broader fabric that supports the government in Damascus. So, for example, Kurdish communities in northeastern Syria and the Druze community in southern Syria around Suwaida, both they reject flatly that the central government should take the lead in, for example, providing security in their towns and in their cities. They reject a fiat from Damascus about what the shape of the next government should be. And so there's a long distance to go. The absence of any kind of transitional justice mechanism, which would hold people accountable for human rights violations, both those committed by the Assad government, but also those committed by Sharaa's security forces and security forces under the Syrian Democratic Forces leadership in northeastern Syria, the Kurdish militia there, and the Druze militia in Suwaida. The absence of any kind of transitional justice mechanism there is delaying progress.
And just lastly, I mean, you've been in Syria earlier on this year. I'm just wondering, I mean, obviously that was quite a while ago. It was in January, but I wonder whether anything struck you about the difference between today's Syria and the Syria you knew when Bashar al-Assad was still in power.
I think the number one difference is that people have hope and people are free to express their opinions. And so you have protests. For example, in Damascus a couple of months ago, there were protests about rent prices in the old city of Damascus. Civil servants have protested because of delays getting their payments. Civil society groups have held protests because they're worried about the government restricting their operations. So that kind of freedom of expression, freedom of assembly was completely absent during the Assad administration, or the Assad regime, I should say. But there's a very long way to go, very long way.
Will you be going back anytime soon?
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Robert Ford, US Ambassador to Syria during the years 2011 to 2014. Thank you for your time, sir. Well, I'm joined now by Jasmine Al-Gamal, who is the host of the View From Here podcast and also a former US Pentagon Middle East advisor. Jasmine, always a pleasure talking to you. I mean, looking at the scenes on our screens today, we're talking about the first visit to the United States by a Syrian head of state since independence from France in 1946. I mean, what a stunning year it's been for Syria's new president.
Absolutely. So good to be with you as always, Tom. I mean, certainly a stunning year, a hugely significant moment for Syria, for Syrians, for this Syrian president. If you look at the background of President al Sharaa, where he is now, how far he's come, the way that he's developed, and the fact that he's now meeting with the President of the United States in the White House, it's absolutely unbelievable. But it really just goes to show how much progress the Syrian president has made in reaching out to key members of the international community, trying to allay their concerns, trying to share his vision and Syrians' vision for what they want their country to look like and to offer in the future. So I expect that we'll see a lot of conversations around how to stabilize Syria even further. We're going to hear them talking about economic development, about counterterrorism, and different kinds of issues that are all going to be related to the question of how do we continue to help Syria on its path towards becoming a stable and secure member of this region.
Right, and I mean, another sign of just how different the world is from 12 months ago when Bashar al-Assad was still in power. I mean, there are reports that the United States is planning to establish some sort of a military presence in Syria. It could be an airbase close to Damascus. I don't know if you've heard those reports, but if confirmed, I mean, what an extraordinary development.
That's right. And, you know, the U.S. has maintained a presence and has had a presence in Syria throughout the years as part of its work towards the countering ISIS or defeat ISIS coalition. The U.S. has always had an interest, this is back from when I used to work in government, of trying to counter that ISIS threat, which is still very much present. But now we're seeing the government of the United States actually for the first time participating and cooperating with the central government in Damascus, as opposed to what it was doing before, which was sort of working around the central government. And so it's a huge step forward in terms of the level of cooperation between the two countries. I mean, Tom, I know you've seen this too. This is going back to President Trump's first meeting with Ahmed al Sharaa, with the president of Syria in Saudi Arabia, where he really seems to have taken a personal interest and a personal liking to the Syrian president and is influenced very much by leaders like Crown Prince MBS in Saudi Arabia and President Erdogan in Turkey, who are all letting Donald Trump know that the key to a stable and secure region really is Syria. And it looks like he's listening to them.
Right. I mean, that meeting in May in Saudi Arabia had President Trump describing President al Sharaa as a young, attractive guy, a tough guy, a fighter with a strong past. I mean, why do you think President Trump decided to take a chance on President al Sharaa, and to what do you attribute what appears to be very good chemistry between the two men?
I think a lot of it is about personal relationships. I mean, Trump famously operates on the basis of whether or not he simply likes you. So there's that personal connection. I think by all accounts, whenever President Sharaa has met with someone, he has walked away or that person has walked away being quite impressed, or at the very least willing to keep an open mind. We saw him meeting with, I believe it was Congressman Brian Mast, who had been a holdup in the conversations about how quickly and whether to remove fully the sanctions on Syria. And the congressman walked away from it, saying, okay, I believe that Syria needs support. So he seems to have this ability to be very thoughtful and very measured and and very persuasive in laying out this future vision for Syria, which is predicated on peace with its neighbors, on economic development for Syrians, a better future for them, and a pathway for Syria to become a really constructive member of the Middle East, which, if you look at Donald Trump's ultimate plan for regional peace and the pathway to that peace, certainly runs through Syria.
Right, and another sign of the overall alignment between Damascus and Washington, another report emerging that Syria has foiled in recent months a number of, well, at least two credible, I'm told, plots to assassinate President Ahmed al Sharaa. These were plots cooked up by the Islamic State group. I mean, do those reports sound credible to you? I mean, have you heard anything about them?
I haven't been following that, to be honest with you, but I will say, like I was saying before, Tom, that the ISIS threat continues to be a really relevant threat and has been, even when it was out of the headlines. You have ISIS activity still ongoing in Syria. You have the camps in the north that hold former ISIS fighters that is going to have to be dealt with. Of course, it also holds women and children, the children, of course, who had nothing to do with the choices that one or both of their parents made. But it just goes to show the level of challenges that still remain. And counterterrorism is going to be one of those areas of focus between the United States and Syria, particularly because of the extent of those challenges. So we are expecting to see a joining of Syria into the counter-ISIS coalition, or the defeat ISIS coalition, as the administration calls it, de-ISIS, joining 88 other countries in that coalition and taking other steps similarly, whether it's vis-a-vis talks with Israel or Turkey or the Gulf, really looking at ways to start securing Syria's borders and dealing with the threats against it from the outside in.
Right. I mean, Syria was, of course, until 11 months ago, a key ally of Russia and Iran. And since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, I'm just wondering whether Russia and Iran's loss has translated directly into gains for the United States, not only, but also maybe Turkey and the Gulf to some extent as well. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Tom. And I would say, I mean, especially when it comes to these sort of regional rivalries that have played out in Syria for decades, I think it's too soon to really tell where the dust settles and who ends up with more influence versus less. I will say that it is certainly true that Iranian influence has diminished, in no short part to the decimation of Iran's proxy Hezbollah, who had been operating in Syria for years, acting as a conduit between Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. And when it comes to Russia, I will say that another characteristic of President al Sharaa, other than his ability to convince people and sound convincing and thoughtful, is that he's also known to be quite pragmatic. And so the way that he's dealing with Russia is along those lines of pragmatism, where he's certainly not, pushing them away. He's not trying to form any enmity with Russia, but he is making it clear in his own way and through conversations with the Russians that Syria is a sovereign country, will look after Syrian interests, and is happy to cooperate with other countries based on mutual interests, but that things are going to be very different from the way they were in the past.
And do you think there have been elements from Russia and Iran, as well as from the Assad regime, that have tried to interfere in Syria's current reality and perhaps muddy the waters to some extent? Do you think there's been an element of that?
I mean, not to my knowledge in terms of just the day-to-day operations. I mean, you have to, if you look at the big picture, and look at all the different interests of the different countries bordering Syria. And this, Syria as a country, as I've mentioned, has long been a battleground for proxy battles between its neighbors. So whether that was Russia, and not just its neighbors, globally as well. So under the Assad regime, whether it was the US versus Russia, whether it was Turkey trying to exert its influence in the north, or the Gulf trying to exert its influence, it's always been a bit of a battleground. And I think what the president is trying to do is really try to minimize that external influence and try to get back to the core issues that Syrians are going to be really challenged with moving forward: economic security, economic development, and counterterrorism. I expect those to be really the two most significant pillars of conversation in his visit with President Trump.
Okay, you had a feline visitor there while you were talking to me,
who wanted
to be part of the conversation
on the situation.
I mean, clearly uniting Syria is a monumental task for a number of the reasons that we've mentioned, the fabric of society really, and the fact that the country has been severely damaged by 14 years of violence. How would you assess the overall progress up until this point, these last 11 months of President Ahmed al Sharaa?
That's a really good question, Tom, and I would obviously leave it to Syrians to have, a verdict on that. But I will say, as an analyst, as an outside observer, that there have been both positive steps on the part of the central government as well as missteps, and that the central government seems to be trying hard to find a route towards inclusivity and inclusive governance. You've seen terrible occurrences in the last year, both on the coast, in Latakia, and in the south, in Sweden. You've seen the central government struggle with that and come under heavy criticism from certain aspects of Syrian society, but one can I think say that there is a move towards a more inclusive government and a move to listen to different elements of Syrian society. Whether or not the central government is doing that enough to assuage different Syrians' fears, I would leave that up to Syrians really to make that judgment.
And lastly, and just briefly, if you will, I mean, how far off do you think elections could be in Syria?
It's a $1 million question, really. I think that there are elements of security and economic development that I think the president of Syria is focused on right now as his priorities. I can't tell you about a timeline for elections. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, that's all we have time for. A very big thank you to Jasmine Al-Gamal, host of the View From Here podcast and former US Pentagon Middle East advisor. Thanks again. Well, we're joined now by David Schenker, who is a former US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, we're talking here about the first visit by a Syrian head of state since independence from France, which was in 1946. I mean, this is a truly remarkable turn of events, isn't it, for Syria and its new president?
Yeah, truly remarkable in so many senses. The transformation in Syria itself, the Assad regime was for 70 years or so an enemy of the West, a force for instability in the region, dominating Lebanon, destabilizing Jordan, sending terrorists into Iraq, providing sanctuary to terrorists that were targeting Israel. And now we have a new government that is trying to stabilize the country and establish good relations with the United States and the West in general. It's a remarkable turnaround.
Yeah, I mean, 25 years ago, President Bill Clinton met with Hafez al-Assad, who at the time was the president. I mean, why did efforts to reach out to Damascus in the past never bear any fruit, do you think?
Well, I think all the efforts were predicated on the gamble or the bet that the Assad regime would somehow split with their strategic allies in Tehran. This is an alliance with the Assad regime that went back to even before Ayatollah Khomeini took power in 1979, when he was exiled from Iran. He was offered sanctuary in Syria before he took up residence in France by then President Hafez al-Assad. So all these American presidents, Carter, I know Obama tried as well, believed that somehow in exchange for economic prosperity, good ties to the West, that Syria might somehow be willing to break with Iran. That was never going to happen. And I think when you saw the civil war, the uprising in 2011, Assad stayed in power largely because the IRGC, the Iranian regime, and their regional proxies, including Hezbollah, came to Assad's rescue. And so this was an important relationship, and he was never willing to split.
Okay, so we've got these talks happening today between President Trump and President Ahmed al Sharaa. What do you think the two sides want from each other? Let's start with the US perspective. What do you think President Trump wants to achieve from those talks? What does he want out of this arrangement?
I think number one is securing counterterrorism support, cooperation, joining the global anti-ISIS coalition. That appears to be a done deal. This for Syria is not only a matter of good relations with the West, it's a matter of self-preservation for the new al Sharaa regime, which is also being attacked by ISIS. A second critical element is really, I think, defining and coming to some sort of security regime along the border with Israel, whether that's a return to a modified 1974 armistice agreement or some other sort of arrangement along the lines of the Camp David peace with Israel security annex that divides the territory south of Damascus into regions. They want, the White House very much wants there to be some sort of more permanent, more stable arrangement on the border. Beyond this, there's a number of secondary questions. What's going to happen to the foreign fighters, the jihadis, the Chechens, the Uyghurs, who were in Syria that helped al Sharaa come to power and now are within the system, but still really problematic? And how will al Sharaa deal with the component minority communities in Syria? We've had problems with the coastal incidents, massacre of Druze, Alawites and Druze in Suwaida. So I think there's a whole host of questions and issues to deal with. But we have the optic, this very good optic of the president meeting with al Sharaa and a whole reset to the US-Syrian relationship.
Yeah, the two men met in Riyadh back in May. And, you know, it's been reported that they get on very well. I mean, what do you think it is about the dynamic between the two men that makes this relationship, an improbable relationship, such a successful one?
Yeah, at the time, I think President Trump remarked about what a handsome, tall guy Ahmed Sharaa was. Listen, there's no secret the president likes, President Trump likes strong men in the region. Al Sharaa certainly is one of these strong men, one of these authority figures in Syria that's trying to pull the country together out of sheer force of will and through military means. But I think more so the president is really pulling for a success in the heartland of the Middle East. Syria is a pivotal state touching not only on Lebanon, which is a country of some import to the Trump administration in Washington, but also on Israel, U.S. most long-term Arab partner in the region, Jordan, and in Iraq, where the United States has spent enormous amount of blood and treasure. They've been a pivot point, now moving away seemingly from their long relationship with Iran, becoming more entrenched in the Western camp. I mean, all these things are a work in progress, but I think the president is trying to embrace al Sharaa and pull him along into this Western camp. We'll see if he succeeds on all counts, but it's a fascinating moment.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, so much has happened these last 11 months. It's almost difficult to take stock of it all. But do you think if moving forward, this relationship between the two presidents continues to go well and Syria continues to, improve its security situation, if those sectarian issues are perhaps resolved and become less numerous, I mean, do you think ties between Washington and Damascus could go down as being one of the great foreign policy achievements of this administration?
I think that's what the administration is counting on. There's a lot of support and convergence on the al Sharaa issue. Trump has great and important relationships with Mohammed bin Salman and MBZ in the UAE. And both of these countries are really pulling for Syria as well and want to flood the country with investment to help it succeed, to put it on the right foot forward. If Syria is able to overcome the internal strife, the sectarian issues, the ISIS problem, the more vexing problem perhaps of the foreign fighters about what to do with these jihadis, then this would be indeed, I think, quite a remarkable story for the Trump administration of getting something so important right in the heart of the Middle East.
Okay, well, I'm being told we're out of time, but really appreciate you speaking to us. David Schenker, former US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs. Thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Now moving on, turning our attention to Gaza, where the US envoy Jared Kushner is holding talks with Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem today. Well, the Israeli Prime Minister's office confirmed that meetings are taking place, but will be not drawn on the detail of those talks, which come after reports that Jared Kushner's visit is aimed at intensifying efforts to ensure that the US-brokered ceasefire in Gaza holds. Meanwhile, the Gaza Health Ministry says 15 more Palestinian bodies have been received in line with a truce exchange deal with Israel. Well, for more, we can speak now to Dr. Jamal Nazal, who is a spokesperson for Fatah and a member of the Palestinian National Council. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Nazal. Just before we talk about peace and the discussions between the Israelis and the Palestinians, we were just talking about the situation in Syria and the visit by Prime Minister Ahmed al Sharaa to Washington today. And I just wondered whether, sort of broadly looking at the region, when you see the pace of change and the developments that we've seen during these last 12 months, are you feeling optimistic at all?
Well, I should, but I'm not sure I am. I see how far things have come between Syria and the United States, and we are so pleased to see this. And it proves and underlines the fact that nothing is impossible. Look where we come from and where we ended up, how long Syria was under US sanctions. And now everything is removed and Syria is at the beginning of a new dawn. We are happy for Syria. We had enough of the killing and the destruction in Syria, and we hope we can turn the page on and have a new start, both in Syria and in Palestine. Look how thirsty we are for peace and stability. That requires construction. We wish for the United States to lift all the sanctions against the PLO, against the Palestinian people. It's time to do this. How can we have peace between Israel and Palestine when the Palestinian government is so weakened by the US sanctions that it can hardly function? Look at how severe the Israeli sanctions on the Palestinian government are, with Israel withholding the tax revenues of the Palestinian government, constituting more than 65% of the entire income, the monthly income of the Palestinian government. So we wish for the United States to open a new page with the PLO, with the Palestinian government, so that we can really start the process of rebuilding and reform. It takes money for reform. We don't want money from nobody. We want our money. We want pressure from the United States on Israel to release our tax revenues so we can help our people in Gaza without always relying on the international community. You know, we could do it on our own with the aid, but not with the reconstruction. For the reconstruction to start, we need international help.
Yeah, okay, so we've got a situation where the Syrian president, Ahmed al Sharaa, of 11 months only, is there in Washington today. In parallel, we've got Jared Kushner meeting with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other US officials. I mean, doesn't all of this show the extent to which the Middle East dossier is absolutely front and center on President Trump's radar right now?
It does, and we all appreciate this. We all appreciate this, and I think were it not for Mr. Trump, the war in Gaza may have been going on until now. But he placed it at the top, as he deals with it as a top priority. And as a result of this, we have seen a ceasefire come about, and this is very important. And we wish for the contacts between the United States and the Palestinian leadership to continue and be also upgraded. We want this Trump plan to go on. We want this to be implemented fully in order to also, in the end, open the political horizon. Let's not forget that the Trump plan talks about explicitly about the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination. And let this be the guiding principle of the process that we will start in Gaza. It takes more than a ceasefire to have peace. It takes more than a ceasefire to end the war. And this is a 100-year conflict. You don't end it only by a ceasefire. And we appreciate the efforts by the United States to enforce the ceasefire. And let's go on to step 2 of this wonderful plan to open the political horizon at the end. And without the Palestinian state, we can never talk about peace in the Middle East.
Sure. So just before we get on to where we are in the whole negotiating process, you are saying essentially that President Trump deserves tremendous credit for getting us to the point we're at now. Is that what you're saying?
This is what I'm saying. We all appreciate President Trump's efforts. He's open to listening to the Arab and Muslim states, and I wish we open a new reliable channel with the United States. Let's not forget that the United States ambassador to the UN has a couple of days ago open dialogue with our representatives, the representative of the state of Palestine in New York, and we had a series of meetings and an exchange of views over that. There are contacts also on other levels between Ramallah and Washington to that end, and we hope for this to continue. And we need to stress the importance of an active role of the Palestinian government in Gaza. Contrary to what Israel is advocating for, Israel wishes to rule out any engagement by the Palestinian government in Gaza, and this can only be counterproductive because for many reasons, as I explained earlier, it takes a political horizon to end the war, to end the conflict. And without a political horizon, we will move from one ceasefire to another. We've had this in the Second Intifada, I remember that. We've had several ceasefires, they all failed. And in the end, we need a political solution for a political problem. And for this to happen, we need the linkage between Gaza and the West Bank, because we're talking about one Palestinian entity, one Palestinian government, a viable Palestinian administration that can only be viable only if there is a political, legal, and administrative linkage between Gaza and the rest of Palestine.
So do you think that Jared Kushner, who's on this dossier, who's holding these talks with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, who is, after all, President Trump's son-in-law, do you think he gets all of that? Do you think he's on side with the whole project of a Palestinian state?
Well, we appreciate his engagement, but there is a lack of a political horizon. I gather that Mr. Kushner is familiar with the situation, with the background, probably also the historic background. But what we need is a political process. Are we going to do this with this United States administration? I hope we are, because we've tried all of this. The only thing that we haven't tried is creating a viable, independent Palestinian state. This is the component that nobody has tried before, and we should try it, and we should enforce this. Let's not forget that the New York conference that took place under the supervision of Saudi Arabia and France has taken place recently, and now we are talking about the ceasefire in Gaza. We want a complementary, not a contradictory relationship between these two processes. The plan, the Trump plan and the New York conference, they have to be complementary. I wish for the Trump administration to be aware of this and to lead the process of peacemaking in Palestine. And I also wish that Mr. Kushner will play a role in all this.
Okay, I mean, in terms of where we are now, what needs to be resolved. So there are, we understand, 4 bodies of Israeli hostages who remain somewhere in Gaza, probably under the rubble and very difficult to access. That's clearly one hurdle. Tell us what you think the other hurdles are, and do you think Hamas is acting in good faith?
Well, my main concern is the obstacles placed by Israel on the way. They are the one who are trying to obstruct this project. And let's not forget that just 2 weeks ago, Israel reacted to the sniping of one Israeli soldier by killing 120 Palestinians. So if the Israeli government were acting in good faith, they would have dealt with this as an incident, because nobody knows who shot him. And so they don't have to exaggerate every time. And now we see all this pressure on Israel to respect the ceasefire. When it comes to Hamas, I mean, there are a lot of mediators who are talking to Hamas, trying to create some responsibility in the way it's handling with the things. But the situation in Gaza is really critical. We need to move to step 2 of this process. So we have seen that Hamas has handed over the remains of probably 24 Israeli hostages. What we are talking about now are four bodies of 4 Israeli individuals. Other obstacles are, for example, 10,000 Palestinians are missing, but we are talking about 4 Israeli hostages. So does this shed some light on how severe the imbalance in our way of looking at things is? So we are talking about thousands of Palestinians missing. Israel is handing over remains of Palestinian individuals without clarifying the identity of these individuals. Nobody knows who they are, let alone of the condition of these remains. Some parts of their bodies are missing. Let me not talk further about this.
Sure. I mean, you're making it sound like you don't really think Israel wants this to happen, and that they're trying to find as many obstructions, excuses, whatever we want to call it, to ensure we don't get to the second phase of the Gaza ceasefire deal. Is that what you're saying?
I'm afraid Israel, if Israel were left to decide on its own what happens next in Gaza, I'm quite sure they would restart the assault on Gaza as soon as possible. And this explains how important the international pressure on Israel has to be in order for the ceasefire to be a lasting one, a ceasefire that leads to a political horizon, including the reconstruction of Gaza. We all know that peacemaking is not high on the agenda of Mr. Netanyahu, but let's all believe in a better future, and let's all believe in a key role by the United States to maintain this pressure on the Israeli government to carry on with this Trump plan that hopefully will lead to something this time around.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is these reports of 200 fighters who are reportedly trapped in tunnels under the city of Rafah. I just wondered what your understanding was of that situation.
We all hear that they are trapped in the tunnels, and mediators are seeking Israeli agreement on their release and opening the way for them to be set free. Negotiations are taking place between the mediators and Israel, probably involving Hamas in some way. But these are groups of people who were left out by Hamas when the ceasefire deal was signed. Why didn't they talk about them in the first place? Why did they leave them in that area? Why didn't they find a solution for them? Well, this is one of many questions that were asked about Hamas's attitude to the ceasefire. Why didn't Hamas insist on easing the situation in the West Bank with all these settler attacks and all the confiscation of land and all the harsh Israeli measures and the collective punishment in the West Bank? This was left out. Well, they call it the typhoon of Al-Aqsa Mosque. They call this October 7th the typhoon of Al-Aqsa Mosque, but Al-Aqsa Mosque was left out from the whole process. So we wish for these people trapped in the tunnels to be released as soon as possible, and let Israel act in good faith. After all, Israel was protesting that people were kidnapped, and now Israel is taking hostages. These people in the tunnels shouldn't be taken hostage by Israel.
Well, some might say they're fighters of a group that's deemed as hostile not just to Israel, but to the broader peace effort. What would you say to that?
They should be released. They should go to their families. Some solution has to be found within the framework of disarmament that Hamas has signed on. It's not ourselves who signed that. Hamas signed this Trump plan, and it calls for the disarmament of Hamas. And if these people can be released upon the condition that they may be disarmed, so let it be. Okay. The important thing is that they survive and they go out of the tunnel. What human sense can allow Israel to make people die in a tunnel if they are fighters or non-fighters? They are, after all, they're human beings. They have to go out.
And Dr. Nazal, I mean, presumably this is going to be discussed between Jared Kushner and Prime Minister Netanyahu. So what would your message be to Jared Kushner today?
We need a political horizon. This is a 100 years conflict that cannot be ended only by a ceasefire. For peace to take place, we need a just and lasting solution. And this can only be a viable, independent Palestinian state. I think they know that.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Dr. Jamal Nazal, spokesperson for Fatah and a member of the Palestinian National Council. Thank you for your time, sir. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, goodbye.